her out. Look, just while we're setting up, can I just say thank you very much to Patricia, Kerry, Stacey, the rest of the team. What great work. What great work, and what a great day. So thank you very much, and thank you all of you for the opportunity to talk with you, not only now, but in the conversations, and I've been to 2 of the workshops today. I've learned an immense amount. I'd be very happy to spend another 3 months with you. If I think there's so much knowledge and experience in this room, and it's just a wonderful opportunity to be able to share that. What I want to cover today, what I want to talk about is a new study that the OECD is initiating on early learning. But I thought, given Tova's excellent presentation this morning and then Michelle's presentation at lunchtime, I thought, what am I going to talk about really, because so much has been covered. So I thought, well, one of the things that I've had to do in my career as I worked in the Ministry of Education on student achievement in New Zealand, and now in the OECD, is I've had a lot of someone talked about yesterday about being in the room, and so I've spent a lot of time in the room with senior officials and ministers, and I worked in Treasury for a while, making decisions, and always trade-offs. And one of the things when we're in conversations like this, it's like, well, early learning, it's a no-brainer, isn't it? I mean, the evidence is overwhelming, there's so much of it, it's longitudinal, it's consistent, but that's not the case. That's not the case in terms of the decision makers on early learning aren't people necessarily that work in early learning, in ECEC, or on ECEC, but they have views on ECEC. So one of my messages today is that we can never stop, and we need to continue to build that case and to build very compelling evidence. So I will talk about the new study, but I thought I'd talk a little bit about some of the things that I hear, or that I've heard, and that I still hear when I'm talking to decision makers on investments in early learning. So we hear a lot that, well, it really does matter for the labour market. But we hear other things that, well, education, that really starts when children start school. So if we're looking to lift our education systems, that's where we should start our efforts. I mean, I find it very interesting when people are concerned about students' results in PISA, they start amending their programs for 15-year-olds. Well, it's a little bit late, so students, we try and push them down, and so they might start with 14-year-olds. But, we've got a lot of work to do. There's another view that, well, children should be in the home. And of course, children should have strong, loving, caring homes. We all believe that. But ECEC has much, much to offer for all children. We also hear that, well, you can't offset the home environment. SES, there's nothing you can do about it. Really, it's just, we have to address poverty before, and of course poverty is a massive factor, but if we're going to wait, children, you on hold, and then we'll fix poverty, well, we're actually just, the two are of course so related. And then the other one, and this is my favourite one, because I have seen one particular very, very influential academic give this advice to ministers and senior officials. Well, yes, you see positive results and when children start school, but it washes out, and of course they can produce the evidence, but we'll come back to that later. Now, I don't know if any of you are old enough to recognise the person in this picture. When I was a child, my mother did a lot of singing to me, which you all know is a good thing. And fortunately, she had a good voice, so it was quite easy on my ear. And unfortunately, I didn't inherit her good singing voice. But this was one of her favourite songs, and we'll just see that if we can. So this is, the 1950s, and this was. Who was this? So sing along, you can.
I asked my mother, what will I be? Will I be pretty?
It's a bit sad.
Will I be rich? Here's what she said to me. Que sera, sera.
Do you want was some movement as well. You're a very good audience. Okay, Doris. Thank you very much. Very good, Doris's. Okay, that's very good. But what is this song telling us? I chose this song because I think about fixed mindsets, open mindsets. In the 1950s, no one questioned that song. In the 1950s, we believed we were born with whatever talent. You know, if you think about how absurd, you know, we say, my favourite one is born with the gift of the gab. Like, yeah, you're 1 hour old and you've got the gift of the gab. How stupid is that? But we know that it makes such a difference in terms of, we can see it in PISA, we can see it in longitudinal studies of children who believe. Actually, there's even cultural, if you look at the global, there's a global survey on attitudes. People who believe that they can influence things for themselves. You know, in PISA, children that say, well, if I work hard, if I try, if I ask for help, I'm going to do better. Whereas other children will say, I'm not good at maths. And we know children like this. We know children who at a very young age will say, no, I can't draw. I can't draw. Well, no one can draw. You know, no one can draw. Van Gogh could not draw at 1 hour old. So as well as for individuals, it's also important for societies about whether we've got a fixed mindset or whether we've got an open mindset. And whether we believe that groups of children, poor children, migrant children, indigenous children, children with special needs, do we believe that we know what the outcomes of those children are already going to be? So we know what services, but we don't, because we don't know anybody's potential, and everybody's potential is way beyond what I think any of us can imagine. But if when you see decision makers believing that it is possible to influence the outcomes for children, and they understand that early years for those children is going to determine to a significant extent, not the whole story, but a significant extent, then they have a different attitude in terms of investment. And that's our job, I think. So we're always in transition from a fixed mindset, what will be, que sera, to an open mindset. We can address inequality, we can address systemic issues, through to with my first involvement in ECC, it was very much driven by labour market objectives. Then we had which is not where it actually started, but that's when I first started getting involved as a policy advisor, and then education aspects became involved. So then you were concerned about access, you were concerned about affordability, then you were concerned about participation rates, then you started looking at process, at quality, at structural elements of quality. Then you're looking at process elements of quality, and I think where we're headed is looking at impact. So what's the impact on different groups of children? What are the outcomes for those children? Because children are not all the same. So no, Doris, you're not coming back. And all right, but I also don't want to, that was a light moment, but the challenge in front of us is massive. I don't want any of us to underestimate how significant the challenges that we've got in front of us. So what you can see in here is the cognitive disparities. This is US data, but it's comparing Black, Hispanic and Indigenous children in the US at 9 months and 24 months. So if I use this slide all the time when I don't really understand what my job is, this is our job, I think. Now back to my academic, who is not my favourite, who puts up us information data in front of ministers and said, yes, but it washes out, it fades out. I think the word term here is fade out. And so a graph is produced that shows that, well, by early schooling, kind of grade 3, I think, in your system, the results. But what we know from the wonderful longitudinal studies, and I really commend everyone in this room that's been working on longitudinal studies, because this is the only way that we can show what the long-term impacts of strong early learning are. That we can see that when these young people become adults, then the benefits are many, many fold. And this is across, we've just got, actually this is this is earnings, but it's across every aspect of adult outcomes in terms of mental health, physical health, being a good citizen, and so on. So you know all of this, but now the question is, well, so now that we know that early learning matters, then we should just increase participation, and that's what a lot of countries have done, which is very, in the main, it's been very positive. So this is looking at, so what's the relationship between ECC participation for at least 1 year and PISA scores? And across all, countries that take the PISA test, it's almost all, not all, but almost all, it's positive. But what you can see in this bar graph, it's hugely variable, hugely variable. So in some countries, the children are getting massive benefit in terms of when they're 15, the kind of benefits, and in other jurisdictions that's not the case. Now you can see Canada on that. It's coming up in purple. So now, no one piece of information tells you everything. I'd always say, take a piece of information, ask the next 7 questions, and see where that gets you. But it should trigger those questions. Use the information to trigger the questions. It's not an automatic. You should never take one piece of data as the automatic. But what I think this does do is say not all ECC is equal. And it's maybe not all equal for all children. Children are quite different. They're quite unique, as we know. So then we thought, well, maybe we'll look at what happens of change over time. And so what we did was look at what countries have done in increasing participation rates. A lot of countries have done that. So we've looked between 1996 and 2002, and then looked at the changes in PISA scores, because maybe there's something else going on. Now, what we can see is that the countries above that 0%, Portugal, Poland, Italy, Japan, a little bit for Estonia, Japan, Germany, they've increased participation, and the children who were in the same cohort, they're not identical children, but they're in the same cohort, so they benefited from that expansion, because we know that when services expand, sometimes that can change the quality, sometimes. And other countries did not. And, we can look at Australia and Finland, who increased. Australia's a very interesting case, I think, and had a conversation with at least a couple of people in this room earlier today on Australia, that yes, they've increased participation and they've done it in a particular way. And if I was in Australia, I'd probably be asking questions about that and the quality for the children, those additional children that have gone into ECC. Now this is a meta-analysis of a range of US programs by Tim. You're probably familiar with Batik's work. And what this is showing is that over time, the very, very positive results that we got from particular programs seem to be declining. Now again, ask 7 more questions, because one piece of information doesn't tell you everything, but it certainly would ask a question about what is going on in those programs, because many or most of those programs have the same structural elements in there. So what's happening in terms of process quality, or what's changing in terms of the children? The cohort of children in 2005 is not the same as the cohort of children in 1965. They're different children. So possibly those children have different needs. So why don't then we just measure the quality and impact of ECC? Well, we should. We should measure the quality of ECC. We should absolutely do that. It is very important. But there are challenges. And some of those challenges, and Tova talked this morning about a lot of the monitoring systems focus on the things that are easy to measure, the structural elements, and they're important. They're absolutely necessary. You need those structural elements. They're important. This is an and area, I believe. But they don't tell us enough. They don't tell us about what's really going on, and whether what's really going on is a good fit for the children, for the individuals that are in that that are receiving that service. So certainly the structural factors we've seen have weak predictive capability. Certainly some measures of, if they're based on observation, can be hugely variable. especially across countries, and some of them are very costly. So some countries, and such as yours, has developed measures on outcomes. I'm not suggesting that there aren't challenges with those in terms of variability and cost as well, but there are some measures that have been developed. So now I'll go on to the study, the new study that we'll just go back to that the OECD is developing. Now I really want to acknowledge the work of the ECC network that Tova's the chair of, that back in 2012, the notion of, well, shouldn't we be looking at early learning outcomes arose. So, so this study, the idea of the study started then. What we'd seen is a lot of countries had invested in their participation, as I'd said, and they weren't sure. They believed that early learning mattered, so they'd got to that point. They believed every child should be getting a good deal, but they weren't really confident in their systems, that their systems were giving a good deal for every child. So we see, actually I might just skip through these a little bit because I think, and I think we've probably covered all of those. I'll come back to the issue on parents because I think there's a lot more, we should be having a lot more focus on those very early years. But so I'll just put this diagram on up. So the network developed this data strategy which had various elements: the starting strong work, the education at a glance, early learning outcomes linked to the home learning environment, and the ECC environment, which is that work is progressing through a Tell Us Starting Strong staff survey in ECC, so of ECC staff, teachers and practitioners. So we've been working with countries for probably getting up to a year now about, well, if you did do a cross-country study on early learning outcomes, what would you want to achieve and what would matter for you? And so we worked with countries to develop their objectives and to scope the study. The countries were very clear with us that what they wanted was to have information they could use, that they're not interested in a study for the study's sake. They're not interested in breaking new ground. They're actually interested in information that they can use to improve various both early interventions, parenting programs at the beginning years, ECC, both participation. So what's the dosage, if you like, age of entry, intensity, and the types of provision that seems to work for different groups of children. And the third element for countries was, what should we be doing in early schooling? Because, at PISA, children are 15. It's very hard to ameliorate, to mitigate, 15 years of that hasn't gone so well. At 5, you can do something. You can do something for that cohort of children. You absolutely can. But so countries saw that if with this information they could do something differently, they could redesign their early schooling systems. And countries wanted they wanted the context. They didn't want just how children are doing. They wanted to understand it. So what is going on at home? What is the individual characteristics of that child? Everything that's gone on as much as you can before that child is in the study. The countries that are interested tend to fall into, have three kind of primary objectives. Some countries still have very low participation rates and they're looking to improve those, but they want a bit more, they want greater certainty about where they might put that investment for particular groups of children. Other countries have lifted participation. They thought that that was the answer. They've now got participation rates in the 90s, high 90s, and they're not sure that actually it's working, that it's working for the children that they're most concerned about. Some countries are also saying we're getting a lot of pressure from the Finance Ministry, from Treasury, from others saying, well, the investment in ECC has outstripped the rate of investment in any other part of the education sector, and we're being pressured to show what's the impact for that. How can we sold the promise of early learning, but we can't show anything in a way that decision makers understand. And if we had more concrete data that we could show, that would help us to maintain and to increase investment in the early years. So countries, when we said to countries, well, what do you want to use this information for? I mean, are you you're just looking at an education lens, you want to improve your, school completion rate, improve tertiary? They said, we were actually surprised because these are education officials, and they said, no, we're actually focused on a broad set of outcomes. We're as much interested in well-being, broader well-being, life satisfaction, happiness, physical health, mental health, being good citizens, strong positive relationships. We want you to focus on what are the things that children learn in those first few years that set them up. So these were the outcomes that they said that they wanted us to look at, and then track back and see, well, what is it in the early years that helps children to give them a better chance of achieving those. So it wasn't just an education lens. They also developed some guiding principles. They said that they only want information that they can use. They don't want to just know a lot of stuff. They want to be able to do something with it. They want to trust it. They want to be able to compare systems. They actually want to be able to look into each other's countries and say, this other country is doing a much better job for migrant children from a particular country of origin. What can we learn about what that country is doing and how they're approaching it? Or indigenous students, or children with special education needs. That's what they're looking for to do. They also said, we know that this is a new study, it's a brave study, it's an important study. We need to do it in a very responsible manner. These are small children. We need to do it in a very, very managed and responsible way. So the decision was made that we would just run a pilot. So we would start with a very few countries, so 3 to 6 countries, and we would run the full study in each of those countries, and then we would assess at the end of that, rather than just rolling it out and say, come ye all. We'd actually contain it quite a lot, because that means that we can have a lot of control over what's happening in each country. We can have our tentacles in and just have a high level of control about what's being done and how. So the countries working down, they said that they want to look at those early years, and they want something very balanced. They talked about social and emotional skills as much as about cognitive skills. They decided on an age around 5. They thought that was a point where it's still young enough that you can do something, but it's kind of old enough that you can have confidence in the measures. They wanted all of those contextual factors. They didn't want something that was just bald outcome data, and they wanted the voices and views and input of parents, teachers and EC practitioners. There will be a direct assessment element, but it'll be triangulated from parents and practitioners as well. Back to, if we look on the right hand side, there are those broad outcomes that they were interested in. And then we looked at the how that was mediated during in the schooling years, and then the groupings, if you like, of early learning domains that relate to those. Then we dug quite a bit further into what is really predictive. So we looked at effect sizes across a whole range of longitudinal studies. So we could get a bit more specific, but what we find is that we're still, the list is still broad and it's still balanced across social, emotional, actually that last one should say social and emotional skills. Trust and empathy, of course, are particularly important. So countries are looking at still a broad list set. I mentioned the home learning environment. This is a very critical part, a key part of the study. So as well as family characteristics, the things we normally look at, parents' education, their SES, and so on, also going to look at the quality of the home learning environment. Now, some longitudinal studies have done that, and I think it's now some of you may be very familiar with the EPI work. So this is looking at EPI results at age 5, so EPI's in the UK. So looking at the different impacts of home learning versus mother's education, socio-economic status. So you can see that the home learning, of course, is more important than those. And EPI has a lovely saying, which is, it's more important what parents do than who they are. And actually I was at one of the workshops this afternoon that was talking about how much parents, there was a case study on learning in Bangladesh and how creative teachers and education and parents are being and what children can learn with very, very few resources. But of course they need the information. You're not born with that. You're not born with the knowledge of how to develop your child's skills. And then EPI also compared, well, what are the relative impacts of high quality early childhood education and care, and what about the duration of that care? And we can still see, unsurprisingly, that the home environment is outweighing those. It's not to say that those aren't important, because of course they are. And we can see that duration matters as well as quality. So I talked about and. It is absolute, so this study is aiming to do and. And we can see that those, because my academic friend that talks about the washout effects, well, that's not what the evidence says. But it also says that the home learning environment does not wash out, and I've heard that before as well. And these are EPI results at age 11. It does not wash out. Of course there are other things that matter, and the mother's education has a big impact. But when we go back to fixed or open mindsets, we have to focus on what is the thing that we can do, what can we contribute, what can we change, how can we contribute for these children. Because of course if these children do better, then they're going to be the mothers and fathers with better education for the next generation of children. So I've talked about ECE quite a lot. So different aspects of ECEC. So yes, quality absolutely matters. The question that we can't really answer so well is what kind of quality and duration. We know a little bit about duration, but works for different groups of children. So what countries are hoping to get from this is largely to see what's possible. What could they and what should they be achieving for different groups of children, and what can be done to improve those three areas: the early parenting, the early intervention, so the home background. If you can improve that, you know that you can make a huge difference. But then you've got to build on that with early childhood education and care, both in duration and participation and quality, and then early schooling. So countries are looking at, we've got these three areas that we can improve. It's not, we see ECC as a key lever, but it's not the only lever. Early schooling has responsibility, and the decisions and investments in early and parenting in those very earliest years also matter. So, I think we've talked about that. So countries that are looking at this, there is a real focus on disadvantage, mitigating disadvantage. There isn't a country around the table that isn't saying if we could do one thing, if we could give a better deal, if we had some, no piece of information answers all of your questions, but if we had a sense of what else could we and should we be doing, where should we look next, if we can improve the experiences for those children, but all children, and before it is so much harder. So where we're at the moment is we haven't actually invited countries to participate in the pilot. We've been working with them on the scope. We put out a call for tender in December last year. We've got some excellent proposals. We're working through those. We're looking at signing a contract very soon, and then we will have information on the timeline and the costs for the full study, and then we will be inviting countries to participate in the pilot. As I said, we want to do this in a very managed way, so we're looking at between 3 to 6 countries. We think we've got at least 3, possibly 5 before actually asking, and that feels about right to us. So thank you very much.